Okay, so opening question. Would you rather be able to dunk like Michael Jordan or shoot threes like Caitlin Clark?
Oh, shoot the three.
Yeah?
Yeah.
No doubt?
Yeah, because one is essentially an act of sort of brutish dominance, and it primarily relies on size and jump. But the three is a shot of such delicacy. It's just a beautiful thing. It's like watching laundry flap in the breeze after you knock it down.
That is gorgeous. Now I want to shoot a three. All right. Ted, what do you say?
Yeah, this is hard. But look, I'm a man and the brutishness sort of like appeals to me. I know what it feels like to hit a three. I have no idea what it feels like to dunk on someone. So
I feel like we could set this up. I mean, I don't know if we have an expense account for the show, but we could just go to one of those playgrounds. And you know how you can, like, some of them, you can lower the hoop? There's no shame in that. I'm very short, Ted. Ted, you can dunk on me anytime.
It's an act of ritual humiliation,
it is.
too,
That
right?
is
Because
fair.
after you've dunked on someone, you have to stand over them and flex,
That's
correct?
right.
This is Impromptu from Washington Post Opinions. It's a show where every week we take you into the conversations behind the columns. I'm Amanda Ripley, contributing columnist. And as the WNBA season kicks off this week, we want to talk about how interest in women's sports has been taking off and if it says anything bigger about women's progress and social change. Basketball star Caitlin Clark might be the talk of the moment, but we all know she's not the first transformational female athlete. Stars like Billie Jean King, Mia Hamm, Serena Williams, or Simone Biles all broke barriers. But does that change endure? And if so, when and how? I'm joined by two of my colleagues to talk through these questions.
I'm Sally Jenkins, sports columnist for the Washington Post. I've been here since 2000.
And I'm Theodore R. Johnson, or Ted, please. And I am a contributing opinion columnist.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
So let's start with talking a bit about the women's record-shattering NCAA Final Four tournament this spring. The women's final drew 24 million viewers, more than any single basketball game, men, women, college, or pro, since 2019. Sally, what is going on? Why all the attention? Why now?
Well, I think the word for it is Caitlin sanity. That's what they're calling it. And it was about the fact that Caitlin Clark really had already had a full season as a superstar to build interest in her. She was a 4-year player at Iowa. Iowa was in the championship game the year before, had another tremendous season, made the championship, made the Final Four and the championship game again, went up against South Carolina and Dawn Staley. It was just this sort of growing wave that had built over a couple of years and then had this kind of cataclysmic explosion over the course of the tournament. There have been record-breaking numbers, by the way, for the NCAA and the WNBA the last 3-4 years in a row.
Okay, that's good to know. And that's interesting. I hadn't thought about how it's more like a TV show than a movie. Like, you get to know these players. You have a relationship with them over time that is maybe deeper as a result.
That's exactly right. And some real rivalries have built in the women's game as well. I mean, there's storylines that are really taking time to develop, and audiences are deeply engaged with them.
Ted, now you were not always into the women's game, right? Like, what happened?
You're right. I wasn't. And I just thought it was less exciting than men's basketball, which is probably a typical man's opinion for many decades, for sure. But I'll tell you what, my freshman year in college was the year that the University of North Carolina Tar Heels women won the national basketball championship, when one of their players, Charlotte Smith, hits a three-pointer in the last second. And I was watching that game with a couple of guys in the dorm, and all of us from North Carolina. And so it was like this moment of our men's team got booted out pretty quickly, but the women's team won the national championship. And I fell in love with like the potential of it, but I didn't know who the players were. I didn't know who the teams were. So I lost interest for a while. But about 3-4 years ago, it became more competitive. There were more players that I saw in places beyond basketball that increased my interest in it. I mean, these women are social media stars. They're celebrities. The NIL deals have made them people beyond the court. And then they're not all on the same team. So now it felt like you didn't know who was going to win. You knew who the players were on the teams, and the basketball was so good. And I'll tell you, the thing that was like the final straw, my then 15-year-old son said, "Dad, why aren't you watching the women's college basketball?" Then I said, okay, let me see what's going on. And he was right. I ended up watching more women's college basketball tournament than men's this year.
Ted, you remember who else was on that North Carolina women's basketball team, don't you?
That tells
Maren Jones.
Maren Jones, that's right.
Maren Jones, the great Olympic.
That's right.
Yeah, the Olympic sprinter.
Oh, wow.
She had a real choice to make between track and field and basketball, and because of the money was no comparison. So she skipped the WNBA and instead became a track and field athlete.
That's right.
Yeah.
I wonder if she would
Wow.
make that same choice today. Probably not.
Right. I wonder.
I think she might go basketball
I think so.
in this day and age.
It makes me wonder, and this is a random trivia question, but have either of you heard like what the demographics are of the women's audience? Like when it comes to men versus women, older versus younger, any idea?
So the demographic is different between the WNBA and NCAA. The NCAA audience, women's basketball audience, I think is much more diverse demographically. The WNBA there've been a lot of kids. They've actually had older people and younger people. And I think that is changing now too. And I think that's why you've seen the WNBA raised about $75 million in new capital. They've got a media rights deal coming up, a renegotiation that I think is going to really change the landscape for them. So I think the demographic is in transition for the WNBA, and they're going to be able to really, really capitalize on the NCAA's build.
And I think there's also like a gender and generational thing happening too. And it's almost the reverse of like the Taylor Swift effect in the NFL. You know, when she was going to Travis Kelce's games for the Chiefs, a lot of young girls were watching football with their dads for the first time because there's this, megastar in the booth. This is different. I think this is younger people, boys and girls, bringing their parents, I think mostly men, to a game that they have typically not watched.
So you look at the Indiana Fever with Caitlin Clark. I mean, they sold out a preseason exhibition game on the road in Arlington, Texas.
And I watched it online with my son.
And I watched it online as well. Exactly. So, I mean, that's not a demographic. That is everybody. That takes everybody to do that sort of thing.
Huh. Well, and that leads to this question, which maybe is the big question is, I mean, obviously, we've got a really special group of athletes in the women's basketball game right now, but is it bigger than them? I mean, we always have these moments, right? With women's soccer, I remember it was so exciting, women's soccer league, and then that went bust, and there was another women's soccer league, and then so you have these ebbs and flows, which is normal and understandable. A women's pro hockey league just started. College softball is bigger than ever. Have we crossed some kind of threshold of believing that women are good at sports and fun to watch?
I think so, but I want to preface answering the question by saying, I think one of the things underneath this tremendous audience build that we're seeing is the understanding that we're watching something political. The women's tennis tour, the build there under Billie Jean King and then carried on by Chris Evert and Martina Navratilova, wasn't just about female physical competence. It was about equal pay. Same thing with the women's soccer craze and the tremendous building popularity that the 99ers embarked on that has carried through. And I think that the same thing is true with women's college basketball and the WNBA. There's always a brand of feminism at stake underneath these women's sports. And I think everyone understands that. And they also understand that they're doing more with less, which is an appealing sort of thing. For years, the women's soccer players, they made waitresses pay.
Right.
They did it for the love of the sport. They did it for the gold medals. And I think there's always been this sense that there's something a little more pure in women's sports. I hate to use that word, but I think that is the sensibility that the audience feels about it, that it's a little cleaner, a little less corrupted by pure dollar pursuit. But I want to know what Ted thinks about that too, because I'm coming obviously from a female perspective who's covered it for so many years.
No, I think that's right. I mean, I saw in the paper just a few days ago that the WNBA teams will finally get charter flights to their games. Something NBA players have enjoyed for decades.
Right.
So the star power of Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese and others has certainly increase the potential revenue streams. I think folks are beginning to realize if we really invest in showcasing our stars, maybe there's a chance here. But that said, I don't think the game requires another Caitlin Clark to continue its growth. I think this current crop of stars have stood on the shoulders of those who came before them. And the next crop, the Juju Watkins and Tessa Johnsons and folks, they will do the same and open the door even more for folks to come after them. It requires exposure. I mean, in those preseason games, we watched them online because you couldn't watch them on TV. They weren't televised. And so if you want the same opportunities, you have to give the women the same chance to make the money the men make by putting them on TV, getting ad revenue and that sort of thing. So I agree that is absolutely political, and that the political decisions by the folks with money will be determined by how much money they can make. And I think the women's game, and in basketball at least, has proven in the last 5+ years that it's there. The stars are there, the quality basketball. And if they just invest in the women the way they've invested in the men, then there's a chance for this to be a mainstay in America, not just a sort of episodic thing.
We're going to get into all of this question of the chicken and egg issue with the money. And also, I want to get beyond just what this means for sports to talk about what, if anything, this means for women and for our culture overall. But we have to take a quick break, and we'll be right back. Welcome back. I'm Amanda Ripley, and this is Impromptu. It might seem obvious that young girls can benefit from having more professional women athletes as role models, but does it go beyond that? I mean, what does it mean for boys and men to see women in these roles, Ted?
I think it's important. And I mean, if I'll just sort of say it, men and boys, their attraction to women's college basketball, WNBA, I think ran the risk of it being kind of sexualized, watching it because they find the women attractive. And my sense of it is it's not that they're actually watching because they follow the players on social media. They like the team, and the basketball is good, very competitive, last second shots, upsets, that sort of thing. So I do think it's a basketball attraction more than a sort of gendered attraction, which I think is really important to sort of state up front. What I'm interested to see is the little boy who makes it to the NBA and says, my inspiration was Caitlin Clark. My inspiration was Angel Reese on LSU or Juju Watkins on Southern Cal. And I think that is the thing I'm waiting to see. When boys start citing women as their inspiration for excellence, then I think we've accomplished something that's really, really noteworthy in sports.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I remember I went to the Women's World Cup in France in 2019, and I'd played soccer all my life, and I thought, I've seen women play soccer. I mean, I kind of didn't expect it to be a religious experience, but it totally was. And one of the things that happened that really surprised me was seeing all these men and boys in Rapinoe and Morgan jerseys. I kind of hate that. I kind of hate that I needed men to be into this game for me to be. I mean, it was subconscious. It was involuntary. It was not something that I I'd planned, but it's not something I'd seen before. That level of fervor and awe and respect that was beyond just, isn't this nice? We'll do this because our daughters want to watch this, but true fans. That was something that really kind of took my breath away. And I think it does matter for all of us, right? Sally, what are you thinking right now?
Well, I think the continuum here is that what's going on underneath all of these games is the question of performance under pressure. And there's a credibility that you earn in performing on the playing field that you really can't earn in any other arena, particularly women. There is something that happens in the way that men view women when women are seen to perform under pressure at a really, really high level physically. One of my favorite stories is when Ed Koch, as mayor of New York, was trying to decide whether to hire women as firefighters. And he said, look, I don't care if it's a man or a woman, as long as they can pull a 250-pound mayor out of a burning building. Well, that's what all these women are doing. They're proving that they can work in the burning building, right? Whether it's Megan Rapinoe, whether it's Caitlin Clark. I think the huge attraction to Caitlin Clark is largely based in the fact that she's utterly impervious to the size of the moment and the pressure of the moment. She performs at the highest possible level every single time she's called on to. I mean, she hasn't failed yet. And I think that's part of the public's absolute fascination with her. And if you're talking about young boys or even middle-aged men now purchasing these jerseys, going to these games, that's why they're doing it.
Yeah. And, if you can go to an Indiana Pacers game, these fans should also be going to the Fever games, in the places, if you're a North Carolina fan for men's basketball, I think more of these fans are going to become fans of that college's women's basketball team. And that wasn't the case just years ago, especially if you didn't have one of those dominant teams like UConn or Tennessee.
Well, and let's face it, Ted, one of the reasons you didn't like women's basketball for a long time is because games were decided by missed shots so much of the time rather than makes.
That's really good point. That's right. That's absolutely right.
And that's changed. And
I also say, I'm a retired military guy, and the first ship I rode on, no women on the ship. And now there are ships where a woman is the captain, the executive officer, and the senior enlisted person on the ship, and the crew is 60% female. And so what was required was putting women in positions to succeed under pressure, to your point, and then men saying, oh, crap, that was incredible. I don't even know if, 99% of the men on here could have done that. And again, the exposure to excellence opens up pathways that wouldn't exist otherwise. But you have to give women and girls the opportunity to showcase their abilities in front of a national audience in order to capitalize on the benefits that come with it.
I mean, I've always argued that Title IX is the closest thing to an equal rights amendment that ever passed in this country. I mean, women's sports is the real secret history of the women's movement. I think that women athletes have done more than any intellectual feminist has for establishing all of this as the new normal for women. Ooh. I think women's sports, the proof of that physical competency and emotional competency under pressure, it makes it easier for men to envision women, driving aircraft carriers on a midnight shift. It really does.
That's so interesting. And it's a little bit provocative, which I like, Sally, that you're saying that women's sports have done more for feminism than intellectual feminists.
A lot more than Gloria Steinm or Susan Brown Miller. I mean, I really would argue that.
Now we're going to name names.
Yeah, we are. We're going to call them out. And I'm going to tell you a very funny story about Gloria Steinm and Billie Jean King, who are longtime good friends. And Billie Jean used to say to Gloria, you need to use athletes more. You need to use us. And Gloria Steinm, back in the 60s, said to Billie Jean, she said, well, Billie, this is about politics, not about sports. And Billie Jean King slapped one palm in the other and said, Gloria, we are politics. Years and years later, they saw each other at the annual Women's Sports Foundation dinner in New York. And Gloria Steinm comes over to Billie Jean King and says, Billie, look, I'm working out. And she pops a muscle, right? So that's a true story.
That's awesome. And it reminds me, Ted, also what you say about the military. I mean, there are these kind of classically masculine firefighters we talked about, these classically masculine professions. And these are some of the last trusted professions in the United States, right? The military, sports to some degree. And that's where once men see, as Sally has said, women perform excellence under pressure, there's like a switch that can flip in your head. I remember, not that long ago, interviewing a SEAL Team 6 member who had worked with female special forces operators in Afghanistan and Iraq. And this guy, I mean, you might as well take him out of a women's studies major. I mean, he was absolutely, he was correcting me like multiple times in the way I was talking about the female soldiers, because he'd seen it and he'd put his life on the line alongside these women. So there's something that happens.
So you know where the last frontier is, right? Money. Wall Street.
And the SEAL teams.
And the SEALs. I'll give you that one. Okay.
Well, they've been working alongside them for a while, but they're not quite, they're not in the movies yet.
Comms, that's right. Yeah, they've been there.
But it's interesting because, Sally, when I hear you say that Wall Street finance, that's true. But then it's like, I don't know. Now we're really going to get in trouble, but why not? I feel like there's a bit of a diabolical thing here, right? The more women succeed in these areas, they get the charter planes, they get the big salaries, God willing, they start getting paid close to what male athletes make. Then they lose that sense that this is genuine, right? Like there's sacrifice here. There's something like real and earnest and more quote unquote pure here. And if I had my preference, rather than see women become the wolves of Wall Street, I'd rather see Wall Street disappear. That would be my preference. Like, this is a corrupt industry, that needs to change. So but the same is true, you could say, of professional sports. They have their own corruption. So I don't know.
So this is the point we're approaching where these sports and their constituencies are going to have to ask, do we want to replicate the flawed and corrupt systems of men's athletics, or are we going for a different model, or do we want something different? It's going to be really interesting. And I asked Nora Ephron this question, the great writer Nora Ephron, before she died. I was talking to her about all of this because she had covered the Billie Jean King Bobby Riggs match, the famous battle of the sexes. And I said, what do you think? And I said, are women's sports just going to replicate all the ills of men's sports? And she said, the only answer I have for you is not yet. So, right now that question's in a bit of a holding pattern. So yeah, I mean, women deserve charter jets in women's basketball to maintain the quality of play so that they're not so exhausted, to preserve their health. That's not a perk as much as, I think, a pretty fundamental physical necessity for professional athletes.
True.
But these are very interesting questions, and I hope not. I hope they don't just absolutely replicate everything that has soured in NCAA men's basketball. You know, I hope we don't go one and done. The WNBA has done a good job of holding the line and saying we are not going to use the NCAA as a minor league for our pro league and give them 1 year of experience. There's still an age limit and a schooling limit in the WNBA, and I hope they don't ever relinquish it because I think it's ruined the men's game.
There's some like sort of fork in the road.
Yeah,
and
there really is.
The leaders of these games will have to make a decision, right? It's very easy, I think, to fall into the trap of thinking because this is what the men always did and this is where the respect and prestige are, this is what we will do. So that hopefully will be the subject of another podcast in 10 years when we know the answer to this question, maybe 20, maybe 30. But look, thank you both so much for talking with me today. I feel like it's a time of incredible energy and joy and uncertainty and just a lot of fun, which is awesome because we don't always get to talk about those words in this podcast.
Thank you so much for allowing a new fan to be part of the conversation. And I will say for the first time in July, I will not check out of sports. I'm not much of a baseball guy. So between football and basketball, July is the dead month. No more. I've got WNBA to keep me and my kids entertained. So
nice.
I'll close with something my father said to me when he had discovered women's basketball. He said, "This is so great. Now I don't have to be sad when football season's over anymore."
Exactly.
I love talking about this stuff anytime.
This episode was produced by Hadley Robinson, edited by Damir Marusik, Chris Sullentrop, and Allison Michaels, and mixed by Emma Munger. Chris Rukan designed our art. Special thanks to Millie Mitra, Nick Safin, Renita Jablonski, and David Shipley. Find Impromptu wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like the show, please follow us so you don't miss an episode.